the February 27th, 2015 edition of Outside the Box Radio. I'm Alex Ansary, and we have a very special guest for you today. We're not going to be getting into the news. We're actually going to be going straight to our guest, who was on the line all the way from Ireland. And we're going to be talking with Thomas Sheridan, his website, thomassheridanarts.com. And we're going to be talking about sociopaths in society, sociopaths in the truth movement. We're really going to be taking a closer look at society today. And we're also going to ask the questions, what does it take from us to be self-responsible, to live healthy lives, and not become the monsters that we say that we're against? So without any further ado, Thomas, thanks for coming on the show today.
Thank you. That was a very eloquent intro, Alex. Quite liked it.
Thank you very much. And, this is a very important issue. Sociopaths, the dark side of the truth movement or freedom movement, as we see so many fragmented groups that have spent a lot of time in combat with each other over words and things of that nature, as well as looking at society today, police brutality, other issues you've covered on recent shows. We've certainly seen the rise of this type of personality, the sociopathic, psychotic personality. When did you start writing about these things on your blog, thomassheridanarts.com? And what were some of the influences, or some of the things that you experienced early on in your life that got you thinking about these issues?
Well, fortunately, I don't think I've ever been in a relationship with a psychopathic individual. There was a woman when I was younger, but she was a cokehead. And so, you can't really judge someone who has a cocaine problem because they could actually be a decent person in them. Because drugs like cocaine can actually make people act like psychopaths. So I'm not going to dehumanize her and say years that she was. She could have been. That was when I was in my early 20s. My experience has nearly always been exclusively at work. Jobs in the office, in the corporate environment, overwhelmingly, or in companies that I worked in that dealt with bureaucratic structures like senior civil servants, senior public workers, senior government managers. That element of the world is absolutely saturated with them because it's a job for life. There's no real accountability. They'll always get promotions and so on. That's why, in capital cities where you'll have the bureaucracy, like Washington, Dublin, London, Paris, all the capitals, Brussels especially, you'll have them clustering there. That's where they go because that's where the government jobs are, and that's where the easy life for the psychopath is because they don't really have to be go-getters to actually get ahead.
Yeah. And by the way, I want to ask, are you in an urban part of Ireland or are you in a more rural part of Ireland? And are you seeing more of these sociopathic tendencies in urban environments, or does it even matter?
Well, they're everywhere, but I live in a small country village, really. It's quite a very nice place. It's a nice, easygoing kind of rural market town, very small, a couple of thousand people. But I know everybody in the town. Everyone knows me. So it's nice. So it's harder for them to hide in those kinds of towns because, in the small town, the people do whisper and talk. In the large cities, they can hide because there's an element of anonymity. But also, ultimately what they're after is they suck energy dry off others. They're like the ultimate parasite, and you're going to get the juiciest fruits and the easiest opportunities and the greater the target-rich environment, to use a military term, in a large urban area, predominantly a wealthy city. So a city that has a good business structure, say a big IT, banking, that kind of thing. A city that has broadcast media, advertising, a big art scene. I'm not talking about necessarily the music scene. I'm talking about the visual art scene. A lot of fakes and that kind of element of it. Yet where there's money and there's money being spent, there's a sense of affluence that draws attractive people, it draws attractive lifestyles. They will cluster and they will come in, they will swarm like a parasite in such environments.
Yeah, you asked me where I was earlier, and I'm in Portland, Oregon, and that's kind of one of the, how I've learned about some of these things firsthand. Not just so much dealing with what people call trolls and people in the YouTube comment section on Facebook basically acting like monkeys throwing their poop anytime a controversial view is thrown out there. But by living in the most gentrified city in Portland that at one point had the title of the most livable city in all America. based on the rent, cool stuff to do, parties, Irish beer. There's a lot of Irish and Western Europeans here. There's a climate here that they enjoy that's similar to that part of the world. It's very moist. It's very humid. Big trees. There are some trees that haven't been cut down. So, people love to have that sense of connection with nature, especially if it's like, the land that their ancestors lived in. The dark side is the greed that it brings when it becomes a super popular place and everybody wants to live there. And they don't care who they displace or make homeless. And so we've quickly become the whitest city in America, even though we read a lot of stories about white genocide and whatnot. It's actually the opposite in Portland. It's a brown genocide. It's a dark genocide. And so I've learned a lot about that sociopathic, hey, our tribe is important, but your tribe is crap. We're here to take over. We're hip, we're cool, and it's time to burn the old ways. And so I think that we're seeing this sociopathic nature on a more global scale, but we may be able to see really clear examples of it on these microcosmic levels.
Well, that's absolutely beautiful what you just said, Alex, and I want to congratulate that because that's a point I never hear on the alternative media. But absolutely, there's a kind of I'm sick of hearing about this white genocide. It's the other way round all over the world. And it's not only a white genocide, but it's a working class elimination. Now, you just said something very poignant then. You said that you had all these trendy, sort of like progressive, cultural Marxist, sort of like hipster white yuppies moving into Portland. Well, what happens then? The first target of all that kind of gentrification is working class people. And working class people in the United States of America is decreasingly white Americans, and it's essentially I've spent a lot of time in America and other countries quite well. It's like Hispanic and African Americans, and so they're the ones who are driven out for this white gentrification. And yet it's these kind of like these sort of like proto-psychopathic, progressive cultural Marxists who sit there, all kind of like pompous and sanctimonious, talking about this, that, and the other. The reality is that they're actually the ones they're the ones who are creating this kind of like psychopathic, sociopathic, whatever you want to call it, proto-psychopathic environment for this stuff to flourish. So I congratulate you for saying that. That's a point that's not stated enough in this media. I'm absolutely sick of this kind of like this notion that like there's a white genocide going on. I live in a country that's 1/5 of the population is immigrants, and the majority of the power structure here is still predominantly within like Irish wealthy people. And that's the way it is in all over Europe. If you look at the ones who are being hammered, if you want to talk about white people being affected, it's generally working class white people being affected by rich ones. And the rich ones that come are the ones who like they're progressive, the cultural Marxists. So I'm glad you said that. Yes, they create these appalling environments. Now, how would psychopaths fit in a situation like that? Very easy. You go into a city that you said has a booming art scene, a lot of money, a lot of kind of hip kind of ideas comes in. All the psychopath has to do is go in there and pretend to be one of them. Because let's be honest, that's just such a BS lifestyle. It's a meaningless, shallow, vapid, vacuous way of existence. That to mimic that is the easiest thing in the world. All you have to do is grow your hipster, your lumbersexual beard, and go in there and pretend to be one. So you'll always get them in that kind of movement. I remember reading a book about the homicide rates in the 60s in San Francisco. It was written by a former detective that was in the city. He was actually the detective that Harry Callahan in the Dirty Harry movies is based on, the real guy. And this guy made an amazing point. He said there was a song in the 60s that went, if you go to San Francisco, you should wear some flowers in your hair, because it's all peace and hippies and all this. He said the homicide rates, the murder rates, the rape rates, the everything, all the sort of like the dehumanization of that city went overboard when all these flower people, all these peace-loving hippies came in. Now, what happened then was, most of them would have been decent people who arrived in Haight-Ashbury, but the parasites, the psychopathic parasites, would have seen that as a very easy opportunity. All they have to do is, look like a hippie, go, hey man, peace, and all this crap, and then they're in. It's very easy. That's a great way That's a brilliant point you brought up. That's a way to identify them. Any kind of trendy, easy, pretentious scene in a wealthy environment with a lot of money and a lot of opportunities for sex, drugs, and all other kinds of things, living free off people. I'll give you another example of it. They will actually become gay to live in a rich gay neighborhood. Like, that's not unusual in places like Greenwich West, in the West Village in New York. Yeah, psychopaths have no sexuality. They're purely just business, and they will actually pretend to be gay to get to live in like a trendy place in the West Village in New York. It's happened. I've heard about it. I've had people contact me about it. Leave a wife to go and say, I'm suddenly gay. What they're after is they're after that lifestyle. That's how. I mean, it's absurd, it's stupid, and it's bizarre. But literally, they have no rules when they want something.
Wow, it's almost as if you're from Portland. But,
I lived in Dublin during the Celtic Tiger years. I saw all that when, people from all those types from all over the world descended on the city to like take advantage of all the wealth that was being created and all the opportunities. So yeah, it goes on everywhere. Anywhere there's a booming urban environment, it doesn't matter, North America, Europe, Asia, Australia, they will be there.
I also want to say, I have you for another hour and a half. We'll open up the phone lines in hour 2. We'll get into relationships a little bit as well, because also, a lot of people are boxed into this mentality of thinking, oh, it's just the men, or oh, it's just the women, based on our perspective, whether we identify with man or women. But as most of us are heterosexuals probably that are listening, and if some of us are on the more conscious path, we're going to have issues with sociopathic members of the opposite sex. So if they're female, they may come across male sociopaths that just want them for their vagina. And if we're male, we're going to come across women constantly that are only looking at us based on how much money we have. So I would say to the female audience members on Facebook that may get offended when the men share their emotions, please don't be sexist to us, please. Have compassion, because just because we are men and we can pick big things up, don't say that we don't have a right to emotion. And so in the last few years, I've seen women of more than any other group hurt me, especially when they get close to me on Facebook. When I share something personal or when I'm hurting, they're some of the quickest to do revenge hurt. And one of those people that did that recently is a mutual friend of ours who may be listening to the show that often likes a lot of your links. I was just appalled at how much he tried to cut me emotionally and say, oh, you creep, how dare you say that, based on, a misunderstanding. So we are now in a day and age where people are finding each other on Facebook, but they're bringing that Babylonian attitude with them to the table. And people should, remember that it's maintaining that wreckage that people may have brought from their family, which is another area, how we inherit what our parents put under us. But I think that we should be responsible to not repeat those behaviors, to be conscious of it, and not think that we just automatically evolve beyond it because we're aware of the New World Order or we're aware of chemtrails or the big conspiracy.
There's no reason to throw away your humanity because of anything. I mean, it's unfortunate you've had those experiences. We all have, men and women, gays and straights, and it's just how it is. I don't know what's going on. I mean, I think also we live in a time where a lot of people are confused. A lot, especially in this alternative movement, there's kind of like a nervous breakdown going on inside it. A lot of people who've been in it for a few years now have all expected something to happen. They thought 2012 was going to happen. They thought there was going to be a big overthrow of the elites. They thought there was going to be the 100 monkeys. They thought there was going to be some big change. Some thought there was going to be aliens arriving, whatever, and none of it ever happened. And I think it's at the point now where the beast is starting to consume itself, and we're ripping each other apart in this movement in order to sort of like deflect from the blame that we were actually suckers waiting for something that died. Well, I wasn't waiting, but some people were actually believed that something was about to blow or something was about to happen, and nothing happened because there was, and I'll tell you why that was, because there was psychopaths and sociopaths within this movement who were feeding this end time psychosis, who were feeding this idea of a big event coming up, this fear porn. Now, I'm not naming any names or anything like that, and I'm not saying they're psychopaths or sociopaths, but I'm saying it develops that behavior, that sort of like entrenched negative siege mentality is what feeds this kind of behavior, and eventually people will start tearing each other apart because nothing happens. And that's the big problem in this now. So maybe with yourself, it's not so much a male-female thing. It's just probably that it's happened to me with men and women. I couldn't say it's either one or the other, but it's happened. But then again, I have a zero tolerance for muppetry. And so it's just a nasty time in the alternative movement.
When I got involved in 2005, I started with the 9/11 issue, and I watched your video recently where you talked about how there's some people that focus on it being about America. For the most part, I agree with you. Only to add in, for me, the 9/11 thing is important, not so much for America, but the dead people in other countries that 9/11 has been used to be the excuse for that. But having said that, I've been growing like other people over the years, and in the years 2009, 10, 11, I really want to help people get involved in self-sufficiency. Whether it be a disaster that's based in 2012 or a solar flare, I definitely do not think that the way that we're living now is naturally, but or sustainable, especially when we're kind of trapped in these major cities and the governments could kind of force us to stay in these compact cities if there was a disease outbreak that they themselves released. But I got it more into like researching archons and Gnostic knowledge in 2011, 2012, and, looking at it from a deeper perspective as to what we're doing here on the planet. And I noticed that a lot of numbers dropped when I changed the topics and I got into some of the stuff, and people started getting all of a sudden offended. And a huge support base vanished. It also could have been just the effect of the times. People began burn out on the knowledge. Maybe some people were disappointed that they didn't have their 2012 in-time event. And there's also some people, you may have noticed them too, that believe that we are now in the new age, that we have now ascended beyond a need to change anything, and our DNA is now upgraded, and it's time to party. Now, maybe we don't think something happened in 2012, but I think something did happen. I think we saw like a whole hornet's nest of sociopathic personalities unleashed upon the planet, and the world has never been the same since.
Well, in 2000, that began in 2009. I have a video on my website that I made in 2010, I think, 2011, and I actually showed Google Trends, and people were not typing sociopath or psychopath in any enormous numbers into Google until there was an enormous explosion of interest, of people typing sociopath and psychopath into Google Trends starting in autumn, around September, October 2008. It literally was a spike that jumped out of nowhere, and then it went up and up and up and up, and it's still shooting up to this day. And a lot of people I speak to, and a lot of people that I talked about the problems they've had in work or relationships with these type of behaviors, they tell me the same thing. A lot of them say to me, it happened in 2008. This person suddenly changed. Late 2008. Now, my boss did this. My mother did the most appalling thing in December 2008. My husband walked out on me and the kids in October 2008. There was something happened. There's also a seasonal aspect to this behavior as well. I've uncovered over in my second book, Defeat the Demons. I point out how that works. But yeah, something happened and it reached an exponential thing. In my third book, The Anvil of the Psyche, I had spent time at the end, the last chapter of the book. I had spent time on these New Age groups, watching and observing these New Age forums as 2012 approached, and as I predicted. As the date got closer and closer, all these love and light, all these types began to panic. The ones who started to say that something was going to happen on that date, there was this, there was actually pinning it down to a certain date. They began. If you want to see, craven behavior, watch a bunch of New Agers turning on each other. It is absolutely vicious and reprehensible. And these kind of like people with names like Mystic Starlight and Quantum Unicorn were doing the most disgusting and appalling things on each other. Like there was one New Age forum, a lot of them vanished after a while, after 2012, where some guy had been on the forum, and whoever the forum man and the guy had said something like, I really don't believe an ascension is coming in 2012. It's up to us. The woman who ran that forum had some kind of software where she could backtrack where he'd been to, be like a tracking software before he had been, and she discovered that he'd been on like some free porn site, and she plastered this and his real name all over the forum, saying things like he's an evil person amongst us. And all he did was say that 2012, I don't believe it's going to happen. And that's what these New Ages, it was disgusting beyond words. And I think that what happened then in 2012, I think, yeah, you're right. There was something happen. A psychic shock was created. All the New Age ascension cult phonies, all them, they were all kind of wiped out in 2012. A lot of them would be like just gone. But the ones who survived that and didn't expect anything from that, I think that instead of a shift in consciousness, which I think did happen to some people, not a lot, but some people, there was a sort of a lowering of the bar, shall we say. Instead of them expecting things from outside there, they were more said, okay, if I'm going to make it through this mess, I'm going to have to work on myself, so I'm going to have to take it inside. Like when people say to me, Thomas, what's the best thing that I can do to fight the psychopathic control grid? And I always say, learn a skill. Learn how to sew, grow vegetables, learn how to fix appliances, learn how to put in plumbing, learn how to do electrical work, learn how to fix your car, learn all that stuff. Learn stuff that keep you separate from the system. That's how, and they're saying, what? They're expecting me to like give them some kind of grand orders where we form a militia army and go to war against the psychopaths. I says, no, it's your own, only you can save your own ass. And the only way you can do that is to get as much independence from the system as possible.
One of the reasons I went off the grid in the year 2012 in Colorado was just to get away from the sociopaths in the workplace. So there are some people that found my work in recent years, Thomas, that think that I'm a traveling beggar with a sign. It just seems that we come under the most attacks for just being different. And it's like if someone doesn't know, they should do some research. There are people that are homeless, such as myself, that are killing themselves. And there's reasons why some people are left out in the street. There's reasons why some people are terrified of those that are on the non-materialistic path. The reason I went off the grid in 2012 is because for a lifetime, at the age of 32, I was tired of working for sociopaths that would pass up a male in order to have a schoolgirl female in a highly perverted, lust-filled city that's #1 in child sex trafficking, and it's called Portland, Oregon, USA. But it's just one microcosm, as we said, of a much larger macrocosm. So when we choose the freedom-based lifestyle and we go, okay, we're going to live beyond money, sometimes we go through sacrifice. And that's where I think some of that judgment comes from. It's an assumption that someone is trying to pull a fast one if they're not living in a conventional sense, in a mansion or an apartment. And that's one of the things that I'm struggling with. And to me, it is that sociopathic nature. But you mentioned 2008 earlier. And there's something about that period of time between 2008 and 2012, 2013, where I've seen this personality type explode. Now, whether it's caused by the fact that the prison planet walls are closing in, or whether it's caused by the fact that too many people are listening to people with control freak tendencies on the air that are sending them in different directions, or whether it's caused by some sort of energy shift on the planet that maybe it could not be described as positive. Maybe there's some other supernatural aspect to this within human consciousness, to where human consciousness can be hijacked like an Apple or PC computer. I think that is very possible. I don't know exactly what it is, but something's going on.
Oh, absolutely. But before you get to that, like this thing of people saying these things to us on the internet, that's because they wouldn't dare say it to my face. I mean, I know every single one of them would not walk up to me and say some of the things they said on the internet, because they know I would send them I would give them ascension. I would send their bollocks to the next into the fifth density with a good boot between the legs. That's how I'd sort them out. But they know that I would do that in real life. But they can be a hard man on the internet because they can hide under their mother-in-law's blouse, and they can get like free internet and hope to get her daughter and sit there going, I'm a hero, I'm on the internet, I'm a hero. In real life, they're just they're weak, pathetic maggots, and I would challenge every single one of them to a fist fight. Anyone of them, I'd beat the crap out of all of them. I'm a nice guy, but I'm also a man. I'm not a pussy on the internet trying to be a big hero. And there's a lot that comes from that kind of thing. So that's one aspect of it. Let's talk about the consciousness stuff. That's a good thing too, because I actually think there is a need for the consciousness thing does play a huge part in this, a massive part in it. Now, you said that one of the reasons you lost to your audience before was because you were talking about archons and that kind of stuff. And the reason why you may have lost that audience is because many of them may be Christians who are infected. Now, I'm not putting down all Christians, but I'm saying that's one of the problems with the consciousness in the West, that we are not Christians. We are not Middle Easterners. We're not from that part of the world. If you have the genes going back there, that's okay. But if your ancestry goes back to Turkey or Israel, Middle East, Palestine, Iraq, that's cool. You still can carry that down the line. But if your ancestry goes to Western Europe, Northern Europe, Southern Europe, I'm talking about Southern Europe, sort of west of Rome, the Iberian Peninsula, Native Americans, Christianity and that monotheism, that Middle Eastern consciousness causes tremendous damage inside you. And we don't know that. We are actually damaged. Our real spiritual fate, identity, our spiritual DNA history, it does not, for my case anyway, and many's like us, does not go back to the Middle East. Therefore, this is what creates this dysfunctionality. Growing up in a country that was ripped apart by Christianity, Catholics on one side, Protestants on another, people that was exactly the same race, if they were still all... If St. Patrick never arrived in Ireland and these people were still like pagan Gaelic Celts or whatever, those problems wouldn't exist. They just simply wouldn't exist because they'd be all worshipping Lu and Breed and all the Celtic gods and stuff like that. The same thing in Scandinavia. Well, the problem with Scandinavia is the reason why they're sort of succumbing so badly, particularly in places like Sweden and Norway, which countries I know quite well, to this kind of globalist cultural Marxist agenda, is because they've lost their ancient gods. They've forgotten, Freya, they've forgotten Odin, they've forgotten Thor, and it goes on everywhere that there is a known Middle Eastern monotheistic god, a culture out there, and that's a huge part of why our consciousness is dysfunctional. Now, one of the great problems with that is when people were kind of looking at alternative spirituality, they were still applying a Christian kind of archetype to it. So the New Agers were waiting for a kind of a New Age version of Christ to come and save them, whether it was a UFO, whether it was a comet, whether it was a shift. That was just a whole new version of the rapture and those kinds of ideas. And so they never really transcended. So that's why in Martha Stout's book, The Sociopath Next Door, written, it was 2008, I think it came out, she made a brilliant observation that from a study she'd done in Harvard. She found out that in indigenous cultures, sociopaths do not exist. They simply don't exist. They don't exist. Now, you might have a tribe that might have become dysfunctional for maybe because they came into contact with other cultures or whatever. But in general, like the Inuits and other tribes, like native tribes, they would have a vested interest in spotting these individuals very, very early on, because the survival of the tribe would depend on everyone pulling together and having the same human decency and the same human compassion for one another. And this creature shows up that suddenly is very different. They would kill them. They would literally kill them, okay? Because it was too dangerous to have these people exist. And eventually they didn't exist. They've read them out. They didn't manifest a consciousness in there. Whatever you want to believe. I firmly believe if we in Europe went back, now I'm talking about this is your real ancestry. I'm not telling Jewish people or Muslim people to become, or force them to become anything. They're not. I'm just saying for us that can go back to a Western European pre-Christian identity, we could do so much for ourselves as individuals and as people by reconnecting with the archetypes and the gods. Now, that doesn't mean they're actually literal beings, but I'm talking about the stories and the mythologies of our pre-Christian pagan ancestors. That's a huge problem with the Western people. That also includes the ones in America of ancestry of this part of the world as well, and the northern countries. The same thing, not in a we're better than way, not in a we're superior than way. It's just like we must see it as a way of connecting back with the family, because what's happened is we've lost our sense of spiritual community. And our spiritual community goes back to these ancient archetypes of the European mountains, forests, lakes, and rivers, and we've lost them. And it's just simply time for us to go home spiritually. And if we do that, we'll have a better, I believe personally, we'll have a better magnet against the psychopathic system, because, I'm not putting down Christianity or monotheism or people's religion or anything, but Gore Vidal made a fantastic point in his book, The Decline and Fall of the American Empire. He said back in the 1980s, he said that monotheism was the greatest disaster that ever was foisted upon the West, because what it did, it gave the idea of one God, one king, one president, one ruler, one bureaucrat, one leader, one cult leader, one religious leader, one psychopath. And that's where it came from. And you have a situation where you have multiple archetypes, like a polytheistic kind of idea. You have a much better spread of the archetypes and the spiritual identity. Therefore, you're less likely to have a dominant control structure. Even in the Nordic culture, the men and the women feast in Odin's long hall beside him when they die. They drink beer with him. He's not like someone who sits up on a pedestal.
Yeah. And also going back to talking about, as we also get ready to talk more about consciousness, but taking a step back and discussing semi-sociopaths or complicated personalities in the freedom-sharing, truth-sharing movement without sharing names. There's one particular person that I saw you post about who I think puts out great information. It's just some people, it's difficult to connect with them outside of it being like they're a guru or them being above or them being in a hierarchy. And some people have great information. It's the way that they say it to people that are on their same page. I mean, to be told by someone over and over and over that I don't have the discernment to understand their information unless I started episode 1. When the person's saying, maybe in a more eloquent way, the exact same thing that I'm seeing hierarchy. They may have their whole lecture about getting outside of hierarchy and natural law. But if everything is started at number 1 and everything is done in a certain tone and I don't want to be your friend, and I'm not talking about anyone specific, I could be literally talking about hundreds of people right now. It turns me off in some cases forever. And instead of bash this person, which I'm not, how do I make this a spiritual thing for me, Alex Ansary? Because I'm only responsible for my own behavior. To evolve beyond those aspects of that personality in myself. And we could talk more about that when we come back with my very special guest, Thomas Sheridan from Ireland. ThomasSheridanArts.com is his website. This is AmericanFreedomRadio.com. Welcome back to Outside the Box Radio, a very special day today, talking with Thomas Sheridan for the first time. Been aware of his work for about a year now. And so in the alternative media that I consume, I'm very interested in what's happening within society, what is happening within human consciousness. And I am involved in this to become a better person, to evolve hopefully to the point where I don't keep coming back to the earth, regardless of what your views might be or might not be. I certainly don't feel like this is my first time on the block. And I look at life on earth as a punishment. And when we as men are hurt by women that don't appreciate our goodness, I see that as a hell realm domain, matrix, politics, or when good men are treated bad by bad men, and for some reason we can't seem to find love and happiness and community, and our family abandoned us, and we have these horrible things happen to us in our childhood, abuse of all different types, for those of us that are survivors of all those things and more. And yet being judged by others, and people in comment sections having no empathy or compassion. It's only making us stronger, though. And throwing this back in the corner of Thomas Sheridan, this is more about consciousness than politics, I would certainly say. Not about putting people down, but maybe looking at what we want to change within ourselves in order to evolve.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what it's all about. It's their individual responsibility. Always has been. No guru or anyone can take you there. No one can lead you to the path of your own salvation other than yourself. I'm a firm believer in the idea of the monomyth that we all have to take a trip into the darkness in order to find the great secret, and from that great secret share that discovery with the rest of humanity. And that's what I'm a firm believer in that, and I don't want to live any other way because that's a heroic path. I'm very uncomfortable in groups, and I've never had a leader. I don't like them. I don't like the idea. I just like being left alone. I'm a pirate. I've got the mentality of a pirate in that way. I don't want to be a part of anyone's gang or anyone's movement because once you're in there, that allows structure. When you have structure, you have control. And when you have control, that's when the pathological individuals can come in and twist it according to their agenda.
Okay, well, let me ask you another question, Thomas. Knowing what you know and your experiences with sociopaths, how do you keep a positive attitude in your interactions with others? In other words, allowing people to get close, but how do you, guard your emotions, so to speak, if I'm using the right terminology, so you don't keep getting basically your face pushed against the brick wall for, living a unique lifestyle or saying unique words or thoughts?
Well, for me, it's humor. That's what it's always been for me. I've got an outrageous sense of humor, and I love all that stuff, and that has a fantastic effect because that exposes who the lunatics are around you. Because normal people, I found that all over the world, that normal, healthy people all over the world have a basic sense of humor that is almost like a language that anyone can speak in. It's almost like it's born out of having certain experiences in your life and having a full personality and having had the good and the bad. And so I use humor actually as a kind of almost like an antivirus program in my life. It will get rid of the dogmatics and the crazies who can't be flexible in their thought and need leadership, and they need to control other people's point of views. At the same time, I'm a firm believer that like a good joke or the idea of like calling out the emperor's new clothes or taking the piss out of someone, as we say in this part of the world, is a fantastic thing. It's the great leveler. It's always worked very well for me in my life, and it always will. And that's how I protect myself, because a lot of these types, these pathological types, they don't handle humor very well at all. A lot of them don't get it. I find a lot of them do not get humor. They don't get it. They don't get satire. They take things very, very literally, and they don't understand the idea of a satirical story or a comment that's put out almost like a kind of a parable. They actually think these people, when I'm talking about these things, I'm talking about things I really did or said. Like, I always tell a joke about like being on the moon with I ran a brothel on the moon. They would actually think that really happened. They're unable to see the humor in that. They're unable to say that I'm actually creating this absurd situation to insert myself into it in order to make a commentary about the absurdity of society, the joker in the pack. Because remember, the joker and the court jester is the only one who can mock the king and live. And that's a big thing in my life, and that usually frightens a lot of them away. That's a big thing for me, because it's good because it gets idiots out of my life as well. People who are too stupid to understand jokes and that kind of thing. And it gets me surrounded by people that I feel very comfortable with. I built up, I built up a kind of a supporters club around me, which increasingly are more and more people who are more and more a similar personality to me, because they've had hard lives, the difficult things happen in their lives, they've had to struggle a lot in their lives, and they understand the power of outrageous humour in sort of medicating the pain away. And so these are often the very healthy people. So I'm very proud that I'm filtering that more and more, and to the point where I have that. And I've gotten rid of like most of the flakes, and although we had some the other day telling me the earth was flat, but I've gotten most of the sort of like space cadets. I've got rid of an awful lot of them now, and I'm down to a kind of a core of people who are kind of well balanced, and they get it, and that means an awful lot to me.
That's funny. I had someone sending me some information about the Earth being flat, too, in multiple messages on YouTube and Facebook. It was a documentary. Maybe perhaps it's the same person.
No, I think there's a bit of a thing going on. I think I have a conspiracy theory about that at the moment. There's this whole idea of the flat Earth has flooded the alternative scene at the moment. I'm literally convinced it's some kind of university research program or intelligence services, shall we say, a sabotage weapon. So when they actually come to pointing us out, and they can say things like, if we're pointing out something that's really serious, like, I don't know, anything, something in politics or anything, they can turn around and says, but look, these are all the same nuts who are they believe the earth is flat. So these people who are actually pushing this flat earth idea, they're so mad and they're so dangerous. We must rout them out of this movement like a cancer, because they're going to bring a whole lot of us down with them.
Back in 2008 and 2009, I was doing a regular show on Oracle at the time. And at the time, I had good momentum, was working a regular job. The Sociopaths had not completely pushed me out of my humble position of bussing tables. Eventually it happened, but I was able to escape that hammer hitting the nail head, if you will, and somehow was able to balance an Access TV show talking about these things and being actually somewhat in the regular world with a regular job. But I do notice in 2008 and 9 a big flooding of the forums. Oh, you've got to talk about Israel. You've got to talk about Zionism. And these people have had all this time to make a really good documentary about Zionism. Like, really good. iMovie Final Cut Pro. Show me the documents. Show me the gremlins in Netanyahu's closet. I want to see it. I want to see an endgame documentary style lay out the Zionist agenda. Just do it for me. But I haven't seen it yet. And no one sent it to me yet. And it doesn't mean that it's not an issue. It means, people really should, not to attack the sociopaths, but maybe to try to give them some advice. It isn't healthy to expect other people to do your work for you, to cook your food for you, to tie your shoes for you. So the tools exist out there. People should be reminded this to create their own YouTube channel. Unfortunately, a lot of the content has gone in the direction of attacking other people, but what's interesting is there's almost this signature misspelling in the title. They have misspellings all over their work. It almost makes me wonder if it is a signature, hey, this is something more than what you might think it is.
Well, it's hard for them to type words correctly when the other hand is whacking off to, like, donkey porn or something like that. That's the way I see it.
I'm sure there's been a proliferation of that has been sent to Earth from the archonic realms as well.
Yeah.
Now, where do you think the potential supernatural might involve itself in this? Not to make ourselves victims at all, but to understand what we're dealing with. By the way, I read one of your blogs. We were saying don't rush to other people to fix your problems for you along these lines. It will only make it worse. I remember that blog. And things like that are very important because we can't rush to have other people heal us or clear us.
Yeah, no, it's true. The spiritual stuff is a big part of this. I mean, I joke around a lot and I have a good time, but I take my work into this very, very seriously. And the spiritual aspect is also something that you have this thing in the Buddhist tradition it's called laughing at ghosts, where they actually go around and they make jokes and they mock demons. And it protects them from what they believe is some kind of that can protect them from demonic possession. So there's a lot there to that. Now, the spiritual thing, let's talk about that. All the years I've been looking into this issue, I have never found anything to suggest it's a brain problem, it's a neurological problem, or it's a genetic issue. None of that stuff. it's almost like, as you said at the beginning of the show, it's a software issue. It's almost like the psychopath is a software, another kind of software, an alien being almost. Now, when I say alien being, that doesn't mean I'm talking about, E.T. phone home, or I'm talking about like a different form of consciousness. Now, all other cultures have this idea. You have the Wetiko in the Native American idea. You have the jinn in the Islamic idea, the Div. You have the fairies in the Celtic tradition, and you have other things like that all over the world. And the hungry ghosts in the Tibetan tradition, the idea of a consciousness infection, a consciousness parasite that gets in there. Now, there's two ways of looking at this. A total pure cold-blooded, we'll say a Ted Bundy or a Tony Blair type psychopath, they're born that way. If you were to put them under an fMRI machine as a young child, you would immediately see they have a completely different brain pattern. And then there's other ideas where people get infected. There's an idea of being infected, so you become what I call a proto-psychopath. You're a decent human being, but you find yourself in a situation where you're maybe through peer pressure, through maybe abuse. You were probably abused as a child. You probably came from a dysfunctional home, where you become proto-psychopathic, and it's almost like this infection comes to live within you. And, when you think about things like epigenetics, where we now know that we can actually, rewire our brain through our thoughts, it makes you wonder about these kinds of ideas, these kinds of concepts. I actually do believe in it. I do believe that psychopaths are a different form of consciousness. They're not human beings. They may be what the Islamics called the jinn, what the Celtics called the fairies, what the Native Americans called the Wetiko. I really do believe that. And they're also capable of infection and spreading. This is why you have the most appalling behavior during things like civil wars, where you have people who are living perfectly fine next to their neighbors for years, maybe decades, even centuries, and a civil war breaks out and they're killing each other in no time. I think human consciousness is very easily infected. Again, this goes back to why that is, because the monotheistic system makes us that way. We're very easily infectable. This is what cult leaders do. When a cult leader gets a group together, the cult leader is always a psychopath, and they'll start a spiritual school or a study group, and they'll all live in a big house in the countryside, raising money. And what happens is the central psychopathic structure within the cult leader will infect the rest of them in that manner. You'll see this from Jonestown to the Branch Davidians. It doesn't matter how they end it, but to the Manson family, to the Process Church, to the Final Judgment, the infection spreads and infects the others. And that's why they want to live close to each other, because they want those neural pathways directly rewired within the cult compound. This is why cult leaders insist that they have an extended, what they call family, of the sort of like their grunts and their dregs who live in their enablers inside the cult compound as close as possible to the cult leader, so infection is more easily attainable. So yeah, you have to build a firewall around your consciousness and safeguard against it. Like, for instance, if someone was to walk up to you and say, I predict that there's comets going to come to this earth, and inside them will be flesh-eating aliens, and the way you protect yourself is by smoking cigarettes and eating bacon, and then doing everything I would say, and then you will go to a different dimension if you do that. 99.999% people in the people on this earth would burst their shite laughing if someone said that, right? But there's always one person who's been damaged in some way, who's very gullible, who's probably come out of a bad relationship, who's been abused, who will say, well, what do you mean by that? And bang, they have them. They catch them. And that's how cults operate. and that's how they function, and that's how the infection spreads. And eventually what happens is the cult leader, the psychopath, removes them from their traditional family structure or their social circle into the cult compound, into the family group, into the school, whatever they call it, into the research center. And then what they do is they make them break their connection back to the old world. And then they get them to do things like write the most ridiculous articles online so they could never ever go back into the real world. It's impossible for them because any employer would say, here, hold on a second, I looked online and found there was articles about you saying that the aliens were going to come in spaceships. It's over. They're never going to work. And this is what leads to the Kool-Aid moment and the eventual mass suicides of these groups. Or the ones who don't have mass suicide, the people in the cult themselves, they're destroyed forever because their lives they can never be deprogrammed. And so that's the infection. The infection spreads that way. And the best way to deal with that is just like feck 'em if they can't take a joke. Piss yourself laughing in their faces when they say these stupid things to you. When they tell you that the earth is flat, go tell them, I mean, one guy said to me the other day, he was trying to make out, that the earth was flat. I said, well, you conceived on the backseat of a clown car. Have you ever just listened to yourself?
Now we're hitting the nail on the head. This is definitely the meat of the conversation, and I'm glad we've arrived at this spot. We've got a lot more to talk about this archonic influence over the human species with our guest, Thomas Sheridan, from thomassheridanarts.com. We'll be back in a few. If I were to look at the CNN feed and actually believe the CNN feed, that Western women are actually being lured by ISIS, that ISIS is luring Western women with kittens. I mean, literally, who's writing these things? And I'm seeing some people, comment in some of my videos, the Muslims are getting all the women. I'll tell you what, folks, regardless of what you might be reading in the papers, the truth is anything but that. There's a lot of manufactured racial tensions today. We could see it with Ferguson. We could see the manufactured gender wars. And I try to give that topic a lot of dialogue and discussion. Feel free for anyone to recommend any guests on this topic because many of us are being affected by it. Those of us that are male are feeling the fear from the women in the cities. And I'm sure there are many men that are also afraid of women. Hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. I'm sure nobody's ever heard about that. We don't want to be hurt, but we can be hurt emotionally. There are emotional knives out there, and people use them every day on this prison planet, running around shanking each other like we're prisoners. What kind of behavior is this? Is this human or is this anti-human? And I think in the last couple of years, many of us are trying to wake up that there is this anti-human sentiment, even within the truth movement, if we can call it that. Where people are obsessed with their fears and domination and control. So, Thomas, I've been hoping for a number of years now, and I was thinking back in 2012, 2013, that in the middle of this decade, that by the 2015 and 2016 period, see more and more people to be in a situation where we know more about what they call psychic protection. But even every time I propose this idea, there's a resistance. Oh, we don't need to protect. We're all one with everything. What are you talking about? We are not all one with everything. Look at all this rape and human trafficking and people keeping their mouths shut about it and people being apathetic to it. We have things like that happening all around us. We're not all one with that. Are we? Are we, Thomas? Are we all one with the child sex trafficking?
No, that's all new. Can I use coarse words on this station? That's all.
Yes.
Okay, I call them namaste motherfuckers. That's what I call them. That's all bullshit. That's the biggest load of cock going. And I tell you why. It's this idea of we're all one. We're not all one. We're not all one with everything. We're not all a reflection of each other. We're not all this other nonsense. Yes, okay, at some level, there is a participatory consciousness, underlying consciousness, collective conscious, as Jung pointed out in his work, that does connect us all. But this does not absolve us from individual experiences and individual behaviors. I mean, I always think of that scene in the movie A Clockwork Orange, where you have the liberal guy brings the character played by Malcolm McDowell into there, who's actually, he discovers, he's talking about curing this thug and making him better, and then he realizes it was Malcolm McDowell when he starts singing in the Rain, that was the guy who beat him to death years ago and put him in a wheelchair and also raped his wife with a gang. And suddenly his liberalism and his sort of like his compassion goes right out the window, and he wants to kill this guy, Alex. And that's, or not Alex, I think, maybe that's what his name was, Alec in the film, I think it was, in A Clockwork Orange. And yeah, that's it. We have an individual responsibility and to ourselves not to believe in this nonsense. This whole we are one stuff, we are this, that, and the other. This was invented by psychopaths. This is what the psychopaths in charge do. All they have to say then is like, okay, you have a psychopath guru or cult leader or religious leader or whatever, and he goes, we are all one. We are all a reflection of each other. And then everyone goes, oh, damn, man, that's so deep. I believe all that. Like, and then the next thing he says is, and then you do what I tell you. You understand? I know I sound like Liberace, but and then you do what I tell you. And that's what it's like. And that's what they're like, these cult leaders. And all is one thing it's like that thing in the Lord of the Rings, one ring to gather them all, and in the darkness bind them. That's the same idea. That's rooted in this monotheistic idea that we are all one. We're not. We're all different. And psychopaths are absolutely not us. They're a different species, a subspecies. Even Dr. Robert Hare of the University of British Columbia even refers to them as an interspecies predator. And he's the world's foremost, expert in psychopathology. So we shouldn't put up with this nonsense. I'm not, good, I don't want to be one with, I don't know, Justin Bieber. I'd probably want to go live on another planet then if that was the case. No, we're all different, and that's the end of it.
Well, that's interesting, though, because you may not want to and I may not want to, but we see the power of ritual today in the media and getting people to be one with some of these sigils. Very interesting. So we have limited time today, but let's go ahead and sum up some of the things that could lead to archonic possession and, how we could see maybe it manifests in our world and maybe the basics of what we believe, at least for ourselves based on our experience, what works for us to be grounded or whatnot. But I could tell you one thing, constantly focusing on the newsfeed, getting information from certain sources that may be polluted themselves by archonic forces, not the government. And there are certain individuals out there, and we don't need to go by names, that I believe are under possession, that are speaking to millions of people who are hypnotizing with their voice acoustics. Spirit is speaking to people in today's world, or the machine, if you will, through the web. And so, as we wake up to the power of technology, we also got to remember this grid's being built. And so there's like these higher and lower forms of consciousness that are like grids. And there's many, I would say, grids of consciousness that are connected that's very much based on sociopathic behavior and leanings. And sometimes it revolves around certain schools of thought, certain websites. So for people that really want to be grounded and clear and evolve spiritually, bring their higher self into their body and not be so stuck by their lower cravings and fears and lusts and desire to drink and purge, just to numb the pain that's actually there and hasn't actually been dealt with. These are things I think about quite a bit, but I would definitely put that as a number one thing that could lead to archonic infection. Listening to other people that are heavily infected through the World Wide Web or technology.
Yeah, well, firstly, we have to learn how to be careful with our language. I would shy away from using terms like archontic or jinn or demon or any of these kind of like very specific terms, because I've studied the occult for many years, and there is this thing to name a demon is to bring it to life, and we have to be very careful. This is very vague about this idea of the archons. There seems to be some kind of notion that they're a spiritual force or something. But remember, the Gnostics, when they were talking about archons, they were really talking about the bureaucratic structures in the Middle East, particularly in Egypt at that time. Separate issue that. We have to be very careful. That's why I use terms like consciousness, parasite, and infection very in ambiguous, non-specific terms, because I do believe that's, it goes, this is why the Levi priests and the Gnostics did not say the name Jehovah, so he says it, because they were very aware that Jehovah wasn't God. Jehovah was a psychopathic demon pretending to be God, and so they never named that demon. That's why the Levi priests and they had a death penalty for anyone who named that name, because it would bring the demon to life. Same with the Gnostics. They would never say that name. That's why they called it a demiurge and things like that. Now, so we have to be careful how we use our language, because language is itself is a trap into this sort of psychopathic control grid. And so even using the term psychopath, I'm less and less wondering, should I just use things like consciousness infection and pathological archetypes and all these kinds of things. So we have to be careful with the language we use. That's the first thing. Secondly, I think I have a theory that the internet is actually developing into another being. I know that sounds a bit crazy, but we're at the point now with quantum computing and all the size of the web and all the amount of emotions that's being poured into it, the ghost will appear in the machine at some point. I believe this is what's driving transhumanism. They don't know it yet. Consciously they don't know it. But that's what's really happening. There's what's ever on the other side of the veil, ever on the other side of the curtain of our experience, a spiritual experience, there's the darkness that lies beyond that. They're wooing us deeper and deeper into the internet. That's why I become less and less emotionally charged, I would say to people, when you're online. Don't fall in love with people on the internet. Don't get viscerally angry at them. It's better if you see a joke, just laugh at it, but don't get too involved in it, because what's happening then, you're pouring your consciousness, you're pouring your emotions and your psychology and your psychic energy into this grid. And this is only going to, at some point, I absolutely believe that the internet, the World Wide Web, the grid, the internet of things, as they call it, will become sentient at some point. And then we will see the gates of hell absolutely opened. And this is why people have to be very, very careful of how they're relating to the internet, because when that day comes, and it will happen, call me crazy, but I know it will happen. And people who say I'm crazy are usually are usually the transhumanists who are trying to make this happen. That's how psychotic the whole thing has become. But the day that happens, the ones who are too deeply glued into their emotional state and their psychic state into the internet will be the beachhead that pathological consciousness will use to, shall we say, charge and invade this reality. Because I can tell you for a fact, Alex, I know evil exists because I've seen beyond the veil. I've had experiences, and I can tell you that the Gnostics were right. Outside this experiences, there are no angels really. There's only something very, very dark. And we humans, through our human experience, have to create the universe going forward. I don't think we have anything else out there that can save us except ourselves. And I'm not saying this new age thing that we are God. It's not anything like that. But I actually believe that it's almost like the human consciousness is in a race with the devil. And I use that term devil totally in an ambiguous, non-specific way. Shall we say, in a race with the dark side. And it's going to be a photo finish. And we have to make sure that they don't distract us too much into this grid, this sentient electronic mind, this internet of things. This is what the smart grid and everything else is about. Mm-hmm. I'm actually glad I'm the age I am now. I would not like to be born now and be a young kid, because at least we grew up in a time where we had real life experiences. It's going to be, that's why I tell people, if you're young children now, make sure you give them a full life. Give them the same kind of life. Expose them to nature, expose them to skills, expose them to everything. It's because there's a very bleak, cold, empty future coming. And if there is such a thing as the Archons, they're going to emerge from all the darkness, frustration, and pain that's on the internet, in the same way you hear stories of ventriloquist dummies that come to life because the ventriloquist was a murderer or a psychopath or something like that.
And I think that we're in the age of the modern Gnostic where people have this innate intuitive nature of what's going on, regardless of the terminology that we give it, regardless of the perception of power of these beings. I understand what you're saying about not naming them by name, however, also having read, like some members of the audience, Cameron Day's article, never call them archons. This sociopathic tendency that we're seeing within aspects of the alternative media and people that are listening to shows like this when they could listen to other shows, I think is an example of exactly what you're saying, being that we're on the internet, many of the laptops have webcams. Without sharing too much personal information that may be too much for some people with my experiences, I can tell you, whenever I try to make leaps forward in my life, start a new project, out of the woodwork overnight as I sleep, these comments will come in. And one might come here, but there'll be a theme to it with a motivation. And the motivation is to disrupt my spirit. And that's why some people don't allow comments on their videos, because they don't even want to waste time with it.
Yeah.
Well, I will allow comments on my videos, but I will just block those that are just acting really irate. But I will see people that will be supportive or maybe polite for a few years, become a different person overnight if they're blocked for telling me to go kill myself. There are people that don't understand, maybe on this planet, the concept of boundaries, and they think that they can just cross them, and that if you set up a boundary, they can abuse. So seeing firsthand people go through a personality shift from warm to cold in both male and female forms, there's no question in my mind why these are the most unromantic times and lustful and smut-filled times that it seems to be in human history. And looking at technology replacing human relationships, the future does not look good, which is why I do not at all subscribe to this illusion of a wake-up within this generation or this lifetime. And that's only because I feel like I'm a damn old soul that's effed up too many times and I keep getting sent back to this hellhole. And now I'm starting to become desperate. What do I got to do to get out of here? Because we are going into the machine, there is no doubt, unless we are blessed with the king of solar flares. But even if that takes place, we don't know that that's really going to fix things until consciousness evolves. But there's the music. We have a break, and we'll be back with Thomas Sheridan. Last segment coming up. Thomas's website is thomassheridanarts.com. Mine is alexansary.tv, and a remodel is underway. They'll be ready in a few days. Completing our conversation with Thomas Sheridan for thomassheridanarts.com. We're now talking about the mind parasites and what do we do to protect ourselves. Before we go back to Thomas in this last segment, what I want to say is being the alternative media and being exposed to a lot of technology, Skype, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, there's a lot of psychic energy going back between us. And a lot of people don't think enough about those things. They're thinking a lot about the sociopaths on the top of the food chain as they might see them, the New World Order, but not when we're sending hate back and forth. And some of us got involved in this because we were born ultra-sensitive. It's not an easy path to walk, and we have to limit our exposure to technology. And remember that there's things like sunlight, healthy food. I like doing little, I know Thomas does as well, doing little flip cam or interviews or discussions out in nature, and taking that important dialogue back to your computer, but not just sitting in front of your computer all day. Because even if we're putting out conscious information, we're still vulnerable to that type of archonic hack or mind parasite hack when we lower our defenses and engage in negative emotions. So there are these back doors, I think, that can be opened up, and perhaps in the future, Thomas and I and other people will talk about these back doors that can be opened up, and how do we shut down those open doors. Men have a responsibility to not be slaves to their lust. Women have a responsibility to not just see the value of a man based on whether he's working or not or how much money. There are certain primal things that we have to evolve out of in order to evolve beyond the archon hijack. Or the mind parasite hijack, Thomas?
Yeah, I like that term you used, hijack. Yeah, what you said there about going out in nature and getting into touch with nature and, getting out there and working more amongst it. That's a great one. But also, I think an important one is for people to understand that not everything begins and ends in this moment. So if something upsets you or something affects you in the news or something, it doesn't begin and end in that moment. It will. That's just a kind of a spasm of experience in a whole lifetime of experiences. Look, if this alternative scene collapsed tomorrow and nobody bought my books on psychopaths anymore, I'd still go back. I couldn't give a monkey's wank. I'd still go back to, having my cups of tea and big rolls, my feet up on the table, reading a book or listening to like old records. That I'd be perfectly happy. And like always imagine the worst, and the worst is usually not so bad. So, I mean, again, like, okay, the future is kind of scary. It is kind of bleak. It is kind of a bit worrying with this transhumanist thing. But it's not a certain guarantee either. These people are all crazy. Remember that too. And they've screwed the economy up. They've screwed everything up. So I've complete faith in them that they will screw transhumanism up as well. So I'm not particularly that worried about it. But, if it happens, it's not going to happen. Me, I can't be bothered. I'm not going to worry about it. I'm going to just live my life the best that I can just despite them. That's how I feel about it. I just want to just enjoy life as best I can despite them. Now, you said what you said there about men have a responsibility to tame their lust and women have a responsibility to, not answer the Avon lady all the time, whatever, not to be sexist, but we also have a dark side, and our dark side is there to be indulged. If you want to meet the most dysfunctional people on this earth, they're people who've never ever indulged their dark side, either when they were young, they may have grown, like I may have grown up in some kind of religious group where everything has been kind of clean as a whistle and all like very wholesome. But you'll find eventually when those people go off the rails, they're the ones that really go off the rails because the dark side that they've never indulged. Now I'm not saying you do the worst things, but you shouldn't be going love and light, no bad thoughts. No, I'm talking about if someone really does something nasty to you, and I don't know, you picture in your mind, I don't know, his head being pulled out through his backside and then tied up with barbed wire, and it's funny. Then do it, okay? Don't do it in real life, but do it, okay? And that's that. If you don't get that out, if you go, everything is, I send you light, everything is love and light, turn the other cheek and all this nonsense, that will actually fester darker and darker inside you until it explodes like a bomb. And it'll not explode in a very nice way. It'll a very self-destructive way that'll explode. So, we have to tame our behavior, and human decency does that. Like human decency, like a person's sex life. I don't care what two consenting adults do once they're consenting and no one is being hurt. Whatever they want to get up to, that's their own business. But that, at the same time, too, human decency is a tremendous leveler in this world. I have great faith. That's why, politically, I'm probably closer to being an anarchist, because an anarchist has this belief in that human decency will always triumph in the end. If we don't have leaders telling us how to think all the time, it's almost like a vote for human decency. And I always believe that that's the great safety valve. The vast majority of people that I've met in my life, and I've met a tremendous amount of people all over the world of every kind of subculture and every kind of group and every kind of freak you could meet, and the majority of them were wonderful people. The psychopaths were tiny.
Well, looks like we have reached the conclusion of the show. Thomas Sheridan, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, Alex.
And there's so much more I want to get into, but we're going to have to pause it now and return to it. It was a great show. A lot of very important information was shared today. The interview is going to be posted over at AmericanFreedomRadio.com by tomorrow and over at YouTube.com/AlexAnsary. We'll see you Monday at 2 o'clock Pacific time. Take care.